We're really pleased today to have with us Bonnie Ernst. He lived in South Africa almost all his life until about 3 years ago he moved to Park Rapids. So when I met him today, I said, "And what brought you to Park Rapids?" And he said his son works at the Smoky Hills outdoor store, right? And so his son said, "Well, since you're retired, why don't you move here?" So he did. And when he was in South Africa, he was a lawyer working on labor, the workers and labor rights. And he and his wife often visited the wildlife parks. So he is going to share some of his love for these wonderful animals with us today. Welcome.
I hope you can hear me. Good. Hi, ladies and gentlemen. I'm so pleased for the turnout here today. It's wonderful to see all you people here. You know, I've been sitting in the audience many a time, and today is my turn to be out here. And it's a privilege to be here and share a little bit about the facts and the wildlife of the South African parks. So I hope you enjoy it. And this is my start picture, so let's see how it goes. Maybe just all the pictures taken here were taken either by me or my wife. And I don't portray to be an expert photographer, but it's stuff that we enjoy doing. So except for 2 pictures, I think, that's in the slide presentation has all been taken by us. So there we go. Maybe I should stand here that I can see. This is just the scope of what I'm going to deal with. There's lots of pictures at least, so not too much writing. So we'll go it from there. It's just a little bit about the introduction, and then some location and maps for people that are not familiar where South Africa is and where these parks are located. And then we'll deal firstly with the Kruger National Park, which is our largest park, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. And then secondly, the word which I think is very difficult to pronounce in English, Kalahari Trans-Frontier Park. So there should be a prize for anybody that can say that. Kalahari. I'll also deal with some challenges that we have. I mean, wildlife over the world is under tremendous pressure and strain, and it's no different in South Africa. Although we are blessed with an abundance of wildlife, everybody knows about the rhinos. We'll talk a little bit about that. So a little bit about that, and then some questions. If I can answer them, maybe I'll try my best. Right. First slide is, it's about 9,000 miles as the crow flies, and I think these days as Google flies. You can see this was a crow because it's not that straight. To get to South Africa, which is in the southern tip of Africa. South Africa is about twice the size of Texas, if that were to give you an idea of the size of South Africa, about 8 times smaller than the US of A. So there we are. To get there by plane is a little bit more complicated than that. We've just come back from a trip. It took us like two days to get there, type of thing, because you have to fly via certain areas and etc. But that's where we are. I'll start with a little bit of introduction to just put this into perspective. 1898, a person with President Paul Kruger had a vision, and I'll deal with him a little bit later as to who he was and where does that come from. But he had this vision that under the current hunting, and they have lots of pests and sicknesses amongst the wildlife, thought that it is appropriate to actually establish some form of a sanctuary for animals. And his vision is what created the first national park in South Africa. And as you can see, it was proclaimed on that day, a little bit later than Yellowstone, I believe, which was, I think, in the 1877 or somewhere there. But it's again a leader that had a vision about trying to protect wildlife, even in those days when hunting was the sport to do. Today we have in South Africa 21 national parks. As you can see, it represents 3% of South Africa. So we're quite proud of that. It's really a way of trying to protect whatever we have in that area. Today we'll only focus, so you don't have to worry, but we won't talk about the 21. We'll only focus on about 2 of the parks, the Kruger National Park, and then the one with the difficult name, Kalahari. That is South Africa, and what you see here are the various parks that have been proclaimed in South Africa. And the 2 that we're talking about is the one that sits here, that's the Kruger National Park. And the other one, the Kalahari, sits on the opposite sides. I think the nice thing about this is that the climate for these 2 parks are very different because of its location. On this side you have a warm Indian Ocean stream, and on that side you have the Agulhas, which is a cold stream, so this is more arid world on this side, and this is more tropical. Right, sorry, it's now taken 2 at the time. Right, orientation. South Africa, by
You're not the only one.
looks like I need to be quite careful here. I'll probably focus more on this, which is difficult to get on a map so that you guys can see properly because of it's just a long, thin thing, and therefore very difficult. But what I would like to try and do is to show you it's located here, and it's bordered by 2 other countries. One is Mozambique, and the other one is Zimbabwe on that side. It has its own difficulties because these countries don't have the same value sometimes of preserving wildlife, and therefore it is a difficult issue to manage. All I want to do with this, and not give you the detail, to see that how this park has been developed. The red are paved roads, and the sort of yellowish roads are gravel roads. It has many places where you can stay. It's fenced in, and we'll talk a little bit about accommodation at some stage. And it is possible to enter the park and move up to into these regions and be there for a month or so without having to ever leave the park by itself. Right, again, let's start off. 1889, the Kruger National Park was established, and it got the name of Paul Kruger. You can see the size of this park. It's quite large, the size of Israel. And just for comparative reasons, purposes, I've put in Yellowstone, which is kind of about half the size of the Kruger National Park. So it's quite a place to travel, to get around. The main purpose again was, as people hunted into Africa, elephants for the ivory and many other things, the vision was to actually see whether they can't control some of this hunting and then have this protective area. Also what happened is that there were some other illnesses that came around, the rinderpest and the foot-and-mouth disease, that also had a big impact on the wildlife in South Africa. So therefore, this was then established. Unfortunately, a year later, in 1899, the Anglo-Boer War broke out. Now, the Anglo-Boer War, just to put that into perspective, there were 3 parts of South Africa. The one was controlled by the British Empire, the southern part of Africa, and then the northern part, of which the Kruger is part of that, were 2 Boer republics, independent republics, where people had fled actually the British Empire to have a life of its own. Mostly Dutch-speaking people, and the reason why they fled is that the British had enforced language rules on them. They had to speak English in school, in the church, etc. And people just felt that they didn't want to do that. So they started moving north almost similar to what happened in America where people started moving west. More land and to get themselves going. So this war lasted for 3 years, and during that period, nothing happened. And then you can see after the war there was a lull period because the British then won the war and took over the whole of South Africa and made that part of a British colony. And then the first visitors arrived in 1923, so the park at least survived. By train, there was a small railway line that had moved goods to Algoa Bay, which is currently Mozambique. And they had especially built a line into the Kruger National Park. Parts of it is still around there today, but it's not used. And people could actually by train then drive in and look at the animals. The first cars arrived in 1927. Well, it was quite a turnout. Only 3 cars. Here you can see this is what it looked like in those days. You came with your car and people took photographs and then open windows, etc., with line and etc. around. And then I think it just took off, as you can see here. I mean, look at that. 1.7 million visitors per year now. We've just come from there. It's during school holidays. Don't go there during school holidays. It's very crowded, and therefore it's better to get in on the shoulder seasons. So we have 2,200 miles of roads, of which some is paved, as I said, and some gravel, but very passable because it's not a high rainfall area. So therefore, it's most parts of the year it's easy to drive on the gravel roads as well. It is fenced in. A big part of the park is fenced in, and it's really only to curb the spread of disease and also poachers. There's a lot of poachers coming out from the Mozambique side, and therefore this fence would help to protect the animals in the park from that. And just to give you an idea what we have, mammals, 148 different species of mammals, 517 species of birds. So it is, for a bird watcher, it's a bird watcher's paradise from most of the animals. And then obviously some reptiles, you get the normal snakes and alligators and stuff like that. So that's what you have as well. Let's talk a little bit accommodation. It ranges from very basic accommodation, we call that a rondable, which is a round structure with a thatched roof, and inside you have a bathroom and you have an open plan with some beds, and there's a little bit of a kitchenette, I would call it that. So very basic, but it's inside these fenced camps, we call them camps, and then you have a situation where early morning, normally by sunrise, they open up the gates and you can leave and you can drive around, etc. And then you have to be back inside this camp or another camp by sunset. That's the rule. In between, whatever you do is up to you. And I think it's really just to help people that don't get caught at night time somewhere in the middle of nowhere. And they control that quite strictly because of the wildlife and the animals and the lions and things that can kill you. This is a little South African barbecue. So that's what people do there. I mean, the weather is fantastic. I mean, now it's 85 degrees. It's every day a perfect sunshine day. So barbecue is in the order of the day. So that's a little barbecue, which you can buy the wood there, and then you can have your own barbecue. We're skipping one there. See that? That's what I pointed to, just to make sure.
Don't you find it true the machine is operating it?
Yeah, I don't know. Doesn't tell me because. Well, that's what we're there. Yeah, now we see now it's delayed. I'm sorry about that. That is the typical African tent camp, where it's on a board so that the snakes, etc., can crawl underneath and not go inside. It's actually quite luxurious. Inside you have the bedding, Even some of them might even have air conditioning in it. You imagine you put air conditioning in a tent. I don't think it's that efficient, but it's there. And it gives you an idea, and many of these, there are no electricity, so they use lamps and some solar power just to get away from the everyday city life type of situation. But these are very, very nice and you can use that. This is just a picture of one of the verandas of one of the more luxury camps. On the western side of the Kruger Park, there are some land that has been allocated to private enterprises, and it's open towards the Kruger National Park. And you might have heard about the Sabi Sands and Mala Mala, which are famous private game reserves, which is 5-star plus quality. And that's what you would find there. I mean, you would not live in a tent, and you would not live in a rondavel, you would live in some very 5-star quality accommodation. That's very basic. It's mostly when you go on a walk, it's possible to walk in the Kruger, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. This is typically one of the huts, if I can call it that. It's not fenced in, which you would then stay in. Very basic, no power, no running water. And you can see there's a little, this thing is not that easy. Sorry about that. There you can see there's a little wash basin, which in the morning guys would bring you some hot water to at least wash your face and do some of the basic washing to get away. But very basic, and people love that because that's really being inside the bush. But we'll talk about that in a moment. It's normally thatched roofs, because the purpose of thatching, as you all know, is very good for insulation from the heat, etc. So therefore, many things in the Kruger Park are thatched. My wife would tell you, though, that it also, you have a few bats sometimes living in the roof, but that's another story. So what can one do in the Kruger Park? The first thing which appeals to me is the walks. There are a few places in the park where you can sign up, and they take you to a remote part of the Kruger Park, and with a game ranger, and he has obviously a rifle with him, and therefore you can then walk in the park. They take you on certain routes. It's only 3 to 4 days, and you stay in one of those little thatched huts, and you actually experience wildlife trials being on foot. And you might say, oh, all the lions and stuff around, that's not so smart. But the game rangers that do this are very well trained, and there's been very few incidents where wildlife had to be culled or a tourist injured on these walks. So it is something that one can really do, and it's highly recommended if you can actually do that. Other thing you can do is you can go on a lovely safari vehicle, which is open, and that's what you guys did.
Yeah.
And you can see you're a little bit higher, because the Kruger, because of it's savanna and grassland and bush, the visibility is not that great. So the higher you are, the better it is to see around. And obviously the people that take you on these safaris, it's a small number of people, I mean maybe 10 or 5 or 6, are very experienced in the park, and they know where some of the sightings are, and they are in connection with each other, so they would normally call each other and say, you know, there's some line around and so on. So therefore it is useful to use these vehicles to get around. But in 85, 90 degrees, it's not air conditioned, it's open. So one must always think about that. But that's certainly a good way to deal with the Kruger if you don't want to be on your own and you don't have an idea of what's going on. That's another way. No, that's one of the pictures I didn't take. But I got that. It's not that bad. I mean, it's just to give you an example. It's happened. There's a few incidents that happened in the Kruger. And we'll talk about the elephant in a minute. When the bulls are in must, they are full of nonsense. And unfortunately, some tourists are not so smart. They want to get the best picture to show at home, especially we find the Japanese and the Chinese people. We've seen them get out of the vehicle, in a park to just get to the lines to get a good picture. And there's been a few incidents, but yeah, it can happen. But we've driven all our life. We've driven through the Kruger on our own because it gives you more flexibility. You can stop when you want to stop, and you can be longer at the water hole if you want to be. So it's lovely to do that. And I mean, we've never been in a situation like this. We're doing be careful. You can see the lady doesn't think this is a funny way of dealing with something. Right, let's talk about the big five, which is what everybody wants to see. We've been told by one of these guys that do the safaris, he said he took them out and he stopped to show the people a lovely eagle sitting in a tree. And one of the people was from another country, I wouldn't say which one, said, "Start driving. I'm not here to see birds. I'm here to see the big five." So, but this is the first of the big five, the elephant. So I'll use a little bit, if you don't mind, use a bit of my notes. Just before I start with the animals, it's interesting that in the animal world, and I'll touch upon that some worlds, some animals are dominated by the males. Not so sure in the human world which is which now these days, but anyway. And then some are controlled by the females. Now the first one, the elephant world, definitely controlled by senior females. They are in charge of the herd, and they look after the young ones, and they have nurseries, and there are tasks for everyone, so very, very well organized. There's about 12,000 elephants in the Kruger National Park, which is a lot. In 1994, due to the pressures on the ivory, as you guys know, they stopped culling elephants. There was a program prior to that every year they would cull some elephants and sell the ivory to try and control the numbers, because of the fact that you have a park which is enclosed, and you cannot just let animals become so many that they actually destroy the park itself. And elephants they eat 50 tons of food in a year. So, and they uproot trees, etc. So they had to stop the culling, and the elephant population kept on growing. In 1995, interesting, they started with the program to see whether they can't get the ladies on some pills to stop the birth rate. But it's not so easy to give an elephant, they have to dart them firstly to get these contraceptives, and also it upset the herds because they fly with helicopters to dart the females, and it upset, and the babies can get trampled and so on. So they stopped it. So today there's actually, I think, too many elephants in the Kruger National Park. They're trying to give them away, but it also, again, it's not that easy to give away elephants. So who would pick it up and take it home? So anyway, so that is the problem. I've got another picture. That's just the Crocodile River, and there are some elephants crossing the river. They're good swimmers, and they obviously have a lovely snorkel, which they can keep out of the water so that they can go through very deep water without finding any difficulties. The brain of an elephant weighs about 12 pounds. Now that's huge. And it's said that the elephant of all animals have the biggest or the best memory. There's a saying that you remember things like an elephant. It's actually true. They've tested elephants that have had contact with something years afterwards. They would remember that and would either avoid the situation or would actually get to a person who had maybe raised it from a calf or something like that. So elephant has super memory, which helps them in raising their little ones, and also for the little ones, as they learn, they actually become more adept at remembering things from the past, what is dangerous, what can you eat, etc. So quite fantastic about that. Let's talk about these bulls. The young bulls go into must. It's when their testosterone levels increases 60-fold. So you can imagine, because a female cow is only available for breeding about a few days a year. So you can imagine this absolute frenzy. And that's when you don't mess around with the bulls. Many of the bulls are not in the herd. They roam around either all by themselves, and then they just come to mate in that period. And that's the time you stay away. If you see elephant bull in this musk period, and you can see that it has looks like tears that's running down its side of its head. It's a very dangerous time to be close to a bull elephant. And that's where most of the cars incidents happen, because people get too close to them. How long do you think an elephant cow is pregnant? 22 months, perfectly right. That's what it is. It's one of the longest of land animals. It's the longest pregnancy period, poor girls. So, and then the babies are born. It's interesting that an elephant is also left-handed or right-handed. As you can see, I'm left-handed. In the tusks, if you look at bull elephant, any elephant, you would see that one of the tusks are more worn than the other one. And it depends whether she or he is right-handed or left-tusked, I would imagine. And you'll see that many of these elephants, you have the one tusk is maybe a feet shorter than the other one, because that's the one that they use most in order to get their food and take the bark off the trees. Just something interesting. Right. The one everybody wants to see. They want to see a lion. You go to the Kruger Park, you ask any tourist, what do you want to see? A lion. Now there are quite a lot of lions left in the Kruger, about 1,600. There were more, but there was like a TB spell that went through the Kruger Park, and many lions picked up this tuberculosis and actually had died off. They've managed to curb that now, so the population is about 1,600. So people are quite keen to see a lion. It's not always that simple to see a lion, because you can imagine in dry yellow grass, this is now lovely green, you could drive almost over a lion and not see it because of its camouflage. Here's a picture of a lovely lady who was looking at, I think, at some antelope somewhere. They mostly hunt antelope. Interesting, in this world, the male is the dominant person. The females do all the hunting. Guess who starts eating first? The male. So there you have the reverse from the elephant, where the male lion is the king of the jungle, doesn't do any work, and eats and just lies around. Talking about lying around, lions are actually quite lazy. That's why I think to get killed by a lion during daytime if they're fed is quite rare, because of the fact that they're so lazy. I'll show you some other picture the other day which we saw in the Kalahari later. They sleep for up to 20 hours a day, hunt mostly at night, and therefore very lazy animals. It's interesting, they talk about the lion being the king of the jungle. You remember Jungle Book and all of that? It's actually not correct, because a lion does not live in the jungle. A lion lives on grasslands or savannas or a short bush. It's never been in a jungle in its life. People say that the reason why it happened is that Europeans had thought of Africa as a place that's a jungle, and therefore when they saw a lion, they go, oh, it must be, it's the king of the jungle. But you would never find a lion in tropical jungles ever. There's the one which I have a lot of respect for, African buffalo. It's a very dangerous animal. They're not threatened. It's about 900,000 of them in the Kruger Park, in large herds, but they are very, very dangerous animals. They are, especially the bulls, full of nonsense. And one needs to be very careful if there are calves around that you need to deal with it. They kill about 200 people a year. Buffalo, what they're roaring. Many of the people that live in rural areas, need to get around. It's not in the park necessarily. Nobody gets killed in the park. But around there are other buffaloes around in other parts of Africa. Therefore, it's the buffalo actually, when they get upset, they can easily run you over or kill you. Quite a few of the game rangers, you ask them, they've been killed by a buffalo because of the fact that maybe a buffalo is hurt or they have to shoot it and they need to go after it. And then hunters. This is one of the prize trophies to hunt, and people go after them in tall reeds like this grass. When you have a buffalo, and you can read some of the books, a buffalo that's been wounded, one of the most dangerous animals in the world because it becomes very, very sneaky, and it would actually lie in wait to kill it. So, and also people shoot. You see the buffalo. See the buffalo, other problem is that when a buffalo charges you, he drops his head, and that piece is solid horn. And therefore, if you don't shoot the buffalo in the right place, it actually just ricochets all the horn, and therefore that will just run you over. There we have the rhino. Keep on listening, keep on going around. Wait for it otherwise. The rhino. I think the whole world is worried about the rhinos. They are on the, I think, fast going into a rate of extinction. There's only about 5,000 black rhinos left in the world, and about 30,000 white rhinos. Interesting, the word white rhino. It was actually called a wijd, W-I-Y-D, which is the Dutch word for wide. Its mouth is wide, so it was called wide bait. And somewhere in the English language it got lost and became white rhinos, and today it's a white rhino. So we'll talk a little bit about poaching later on, and then we'll get to that. My favorite, very difficult to see in the Kruger National Park, the leopard. Remember, there's no tigers in Africa, not one. It's all, the leopard is the main cat. In Africa. It can carry more than its weight. It would catch an impala or some antelope, or take it up a tree so that nobody else can get to it. And as you can see here, it's busy eating its prey on the right-hand side. It's a very, very elusive animal, not so dangerous because it avoids the humans, and it's very solitary and lives by itself. Also not endangered because it lives in very mountainous areas and people can't really get to it. The giraffe, tallest mammal, land mammal in the world, about 20 feet, can get up to 20 feet tall. Interesting fact about a giraffe is that it also has only 7 vertebrae like a human. But they're 10 inches long, each vertebrae. So that's how they get to long neck. Then the other interesting thing is that the baby gets born whilst the mother is standing up. So that's quite a shock for a baby to get born because it falls about 5 feet to the ground when it comes out. And that's the shock which I think that, where we get the slap on the butt. That's what the baby giraffe gets. The cheetah, fastest land animal in the world. These are 3 cubs we happen to find one day. Very rare to find in the Kruger. They're also very dangerous. There's only about a few hundred left of them in the wild because people they are very docile. They're more almost like dogs. They're also not true cats because they can't growl. There's some higher bone missing in its throat, so they cannot growl. So they're called a lesser cat. So they're not a formal cat as the leopard and the lion. But they're very cute, 70 miles an hour. They can run to get to their prey, but only and gets to 0 to 70 in about 3 seconds. That's faster than I think any car we can think of. But it can't run that far at that speed, maybe a few hundred yards. But it normally gets to its prey quite quickly. Oh, the one at the back, they've been playing in the mud. There was a mud hole, and the mother was lying here on the left-hand side. And I think these three naughty teenagers were playing somewhere in the mud, and that's why that one is so black. Wild dog, highly endangered. People have hunted them almost to extinction because of the fact that they hunt in such a wild way. I mean, it's like a pack of wolves, same way. They start eating whilst the animal is still running, so it's not a popular animal. But to me, they are fantastic. They are, again, in this pack, guess who's the boss? Females in them. And they called, in Greek and Latin, they are called painted wolves. That's what it means. Lycoon pictus, which means painted wolf-like. And that's when people saw them for the first time. They have the most wonderful colors on them, and a fantastic animal, but very much like a dog. And quite serious hunters, but again, in quite a not so nice way. Hippopotamus. And Greek, again, it's called a river horse. I don't know what the Greeks thought when they saw the first one, but that's what they call it, a river horse. Also a very dangerous animal. Lives in the water, then it's quite okay. But at night time, because it feeds on grass, it has to leave the water and go away as far as 7 miles. And then if people that went to fetch water or are around at night time, when that hippopotamus comes back and it finds itself being threatened not to get back to the water, it becomes a very dangerous animal. It's also killed a few hundred people per year in Africa, the hippopotamus. But again, not whilst in the water, mostly outside the water. I think there was one in between, but let's go with it. The zebra. Only point I'd like to make of a zebra, it's like a horse. Lovely animal. They always look fat, but the reason is because they're quite bloated. It's like a horse. When you ride a horse, sometimes it makes this noise, as you know. Very much so with them as well. But every single zebra has got its own markings. It's like a fingerprint. You could look at them, even these two, if you look at them, you could see that the markings, especially on the back, is not the same. So every single zebra has got its own markings. And so people who actually study them can easily recognize all of these animals when they do the study. The crocodile. The African crocodile is quite a serious animal. It's not like an alligator. They get up to 20 feet long. So you get some 1,600 pounds, some of them. You get huge, huge, huge crocodiles. Interesting thing about a crocodile is that it's got 8 times more the bite than a great white shark. So the crunch factor of a crocodile is incredible. However, when you have to, that's why you see people in movies sometimes, you know, that they open up the crocodile's mouth or something like that. The other way around, the crocodile's muscles are very weak. So therefore, it's the bite. It doesn't chew anything; it just rips it off. But it has this incredible way of being. Once it got hold of something, it just doesn't let go. Also not endangered. You find them up to the Nile, the whole of Africa, full of them in many of the rivers. So lots of people get killed by crocodiles fetching water or fishing or do something like that. The crocodile is a very sneaky animal, actually very intelligent. It's been around for millions and millions of years. And it's actually been, they've seen cases where crocodiles have watched people for 2 days to find a pattern so that they can actually get out and catch them when they get out of the water. So be careful of a crocodile. This is the hyena. You can see them there. Only thing I can say about hyenas is people don't like them. I mean, there's even Hemingway, I've got it here, wrote a story about, it's called The Spotted Hyena, again, dominated by the females. Even the girls rule the boys in the clan of the hyena. Hemingway said, Fisi the hyena hermaphroditic, self-eating, devouring of the dead, trailer of calving cows, hamstringer, potential biter off your face at night whilst you slept, sad howler, camp follower, stinking fowl with jaws that crack the bones, then leaves belly dragging, loping away on the plate. So you can clearly see Hemingway was not so happy about these animals. But they're actually not scavengers. They are actually very, very good hunters and hunt in packs as well. And they are much smarter than, I think, where the lion, for instance, would eat and the cubs must find a way. They would actually allow their cubs to eat first when they catch something. So it's not only a scavenger, it's also a very, very avid hunter. Right. Well, this must be a bald eagle, not German. This is the African fish eagle, which is very, very, very similar to a bald eagle. A bald eagle is bigger and only has a white head, whereas the fish eagle, as you can see, has got a lot more white head. It is regarded as the bird with a cry of the wild. If you hear it, it's incredible. You can hear it a mile away. And there are 3 African countries that actually have that as a national bird. So it is regarded as a fantastic bird. And as you can see, it's mostly catching fish like you have with your your bald eagle. That you also, an osprey, obviously, do that. And I was lucky to get a picture of that. Vultures, just to give you an idea of vultures feeding on a carcass. It's interesting that they found that a vulture, when they're soaring with the thermal, they soar. The highest they found a vulture is 11,000 feet above sea level. They apparently have specially developed lungs and feathers that protect them against the cold and the low oxygen. So they can fly very high. But a pack of vultures can get into a carcass and clean it out. They are called cleaners of nature. They leave only the bones, and then the hyenas and those people will come and pick it up later. So a fascinating animal. They're also under serious threat because many African people believe that it has magical powers. Because a vulture can see very far, we've heard that people that play the mega ball or stuff like that would actually kill one of these and with poison, and would actually use a feather or something for good luck because you can see what the Poyabgaball's numbers are going to be like. So we have a huge problem with that.
Endangered?
Very endangered. Very endangered. Especially the Cape vulture is also so endangered that I think by the next 20 years we might not have anything there. The marabou, strange bird, about 3.5 feet tall. It's also a scavenger. Also eats carcasses, etc. The only thing I'd like, what's interesting about a marabou is, you can see this. Sorry. Come on. You can see this girl has got lovely white legs. It's like your turkey vulture. It defecates on its legs and on its feet. They say it's got lots of very high antiseptic properties in it. But I don't know whether the girls just want to look good, and therefore that they have these beautiful white legs. But people don't like them too much. I mean, they look terrible and they look scruffy. But that's the marabou. That's just a picture of, it's a lilac-breasted roller. It's just to show that's probably one of our most colorful birds in South Africa. So I just brought a picture of one that you can see what it likes. It's got lots of very colorful. That, if you see that, it's on the top 10 list of birds to see before you die in Africa. It's called the Pell's fishing owl. It's an owl that fishes only fish and frogs. It lives in the northern part of the Okavango Delta as well as the Kruger National Park. You can see this one. This one has got a piece of fish in its thorn there. Very, very elusive bird, very difficult to see. Some people wait 20 years to see one. So it's one of Africa's rarest owls. Nighttime, most of the time, daytime, as you can see, we found this one hiding in the wood and in some dark tree, looking out. And also the eyes, you can see, is adapted for nighttime. Let's now get this right. This is the ground hornbill. It's like your turkey. It's black and big, but the only difference is it's almost on the brink of extinction. It's a walking bird. It can fly, but it's mostly on the ground looking for insects and animals and whatever. And the problem with that is that it makes easy prey for many things. And so it's one of the birds. There's now a huge project on the go in the Kruger to try and see whether they can't save it. The reason is that they only have two chicks in 9 years, and only one survived. So the regeneration of them is very, very low. So that's one of the biggest problems. So they're trying to protect them. So what they do now, they lay 2 eggs, and people go and actually remove the 1 egg and then hatch it somewhere and then put it back in the water. That's one way to try and get them to. Right, now the next one with a difficult name. Kalahari means place of thirst. I don't want to go over the time too much. The history of this is just very interesting. As you can see, the Germans occupied the old, they called Southwest Africa, which is now Namibia. And the British Empire, that during World War I, was quite concerned about the Germans being so close to South Africa. And therefore, they then had a countermeasure in order to see whether they can't get some troops higher up. You remember where that is? It's the top left-hand corner of South Africa, between Namibia and South Africa. And then they drilled a number of boreholes. I'll show you one. In the river, it looks like that. There's 2 dry river beds. The water flows underground. It's all a very arid region. And that is what's given the life to this part of the world, because otherwise water is almost impossible to find. And people have then created these dams where you can have drinking water for animals, and that is now the Kalahari Transfrontier Park. With these boreholes, they're about a mile apart or a few miles apart. You would find these boreholes, and that is what then get the animals to actually stay there and be able to be close to water. I've said many of that. The land, this part of the world was originally occupied by what we used to call the Bushmen, the Kru people. There's about 100,000 left of them. I think the most important thing is that in May 2000, there was an agreement between South Africa and Botswana to put 2 pieces of these parks together, and they created Kalahari Transfrontier Park, which, as you can see, is 15,000 square miles big, which is, I mean, it's double the size. It's almost twice the size of Minnesota. So huge, huge area, but very sparsely populated. And I'll show you in a minute. See, that's the Kalahari Transfrontier Park. You can see here, this part is Botswana. And you could actually travel, again, there's some, these roads, there's no paved roads. That's all sand, and it's very difficult to do with a normal sedan, you need a 4x4 vehicle. But they have camps, some lovely camps all throughout. And here you have Namibia sitting on the side of this thing. And here is all Botswana. And people come here because you could be the only person in some of those separate camps, all by yourself in the middle of nowhere. And you have the animals around you. People love that. And you can see it's got some very interesting names. Kilikranki, Garagap, Grootkop. The two big camps is Nosop and Mata Mata and Tweerivier, where you have some nice accommodation. I'll show that to you in a minute. Now that translated in English is Mary's Hope. That's one of the water holes, as I've shown you the bore holes. They've sent guys out there to drill the bore holes. And apparently Mary and her husband was then allocated a few of these holes to drill. But Mary's husband had a bit of a drinking problem. So he never actually did any drilling. And the saying has it that the wife then said, well, I'll finish the job so we can get the money that we were supposed to be paid. And she drilled this hole all by herself. And that's why it's now named after her, Mari Sagat, Mary's hole. Ways to get around, that's our little camper. It's an opening with a tent